Hi, Howard Jones here. Welcome to this extract from my recent online tutorial where I explain my approach towards finding a good design from an otherwise pretty flat and lifeless photo, which is going to pop up on your screen now. So it's a pretty poor photo in the first place, and there's not much to work on. So I'm just wanting to sort of hopefully get across to you how I approach this and make it more interesting, basically make the painting more interesting. It is all about design and composition, and it's very, I find necessary to plan this out before you start your painting. So you can see me in this speeded up video, this taster, that I'm looking at the big shapes. There's this huge shape at the back there of the sky, and it's important to break these shapes up as your starting point. Otherwise, it's so easy just to sort of end up in a, paint each individual shape and area of the painting as a separate entity. The danger of that is that there's no cohesion in the finished work, in the finished painting. So I'm starting here by putting in the background. It's funny working this way. I quite like working this way because it calls on quite a bit of your own inventiveness, your creativity, because the photo is lacking in detail. You can't avoid. There's no escaping. There's no hiding place. Really, you've got to get that inventive, creative brain working. But there are ways of doing it, and this is what I'm hoping I'm able to show you in this clip. The color I'm mixing there is just a darker version of the first. So I've basically used, I think the colors were phthalo blue, ultramarine blue, and burnt sienna. So with increasing amounts of burnt sienna and waiting for the first wash to go into the paper, I'm able to make these further marks that stay more or less in place. So by doing this in a speeded up version, I'm able just to sort of stick to the most salient points in order to get this issue across, about design and composition. So see, this big area is the backdrop. And my next, I tend to work through the largest shapes first. So this back area, this sky here being obviously the largest single area. And it, for obvious reasons, it's the largest single area. It's of more or less the same color, more or less the same texture, but whereas the other areas are broken up into smaller, and there's more texture in as we move forward. Where my hand is on the left there, left bottom corner there, you'll see me put a lot more texture in the paint, as well as changing the temperature, color temperatures, and the tonal values. So I think it's important. I'm just weighing up here whether I paint that area that's immediately below the sky. The sky is actually not the sky. It's a backdrop. It was a very, very atmospheric day, by where the mountains in the background were subdued like this, and very little definition. There was very little definition in the mountains in the background. But it does need to be played off in terms of tonal value. So I will be going light directly underneath the sky, but I'm being a bit disciplined here by sticking to my remit, which is to nail the biggest shapes first. So my second biggest shape is this left-hand corner down here. And I'm starting off with a much warmer color. And, you'll see from the photograph that this area it was an autumn scene. So in this huge area of hillside, there were a lot of autumn type colours, sort of coppery yellows and oranges, and that is a mix of raw sienna and burnt sienna. But it is a big shape, so again I'm sticking to that big shape, the big shapes first. So just get it in there, and that painting this way is calls for quite a bit of discipline. You have to resist the temptation to start putting in what I call the finish line details. You've got to forget. You've got to try and imagine yourself as running a marathon, and just keep your head down. Don't think of the finish line. Think only of getting the job done, the bulk of the job done, getting the big shapes in. Don't fuss with them. Don't detail them at this stage. And this is exactly what I'm doing. And this helps you to nail these big isolated shapes. And why do we do that? It's for reasons to help the composition. A composition will fall apart if there's too much busyness everywhere, if there's no cohesion. So too many small shapes en masse, it'll have, the only cohesion it will have is busyness. So it's fine if you want to create a very busy painting, but as in most cases, we're trying to appease our sense of balance, visual balance. So whilst busy abstract paintings can be very appealing in a contemporary sense, when we're sticking to things that are more representational, such as landscapes, and we're trying to strike that balance between loose style and realism, then I just feel though this is a very reliable way of working, is to work the big shapes first. Now, I've gone in a section studying that photograph loosely, that there is an area of dark down here in the bottom foreground. It's very dark at the moment. I always go darker than I should because I like to put the dark on first and then lift off, rather than the old ways that I was shown in school. And that was always to sort of build up your strengths and tones and darks from the weaker mixes first. That's never worked for me, and I'm not saying it's the only way, but in my own personal experience, it doesn't work for me. So I work the other way around completely. I try to go in with my most intense colours first and my darkest tones first, and then I can lift them out. I just find that there's less fuss that way than putting something on very weak and then having to try and make it look more, give it more depth by endless amounts of further washes and brush marks. As I say, it works for me. This is my sort of humble opinion, if you like. What I'm doing there is while the painted areas, are still wet, I'm spattering with a number 7 round brush, and I'm spattering sometimes with a bit of the that dark green mix that you can see on my palette, and sometimes just spattering with clean water from the water tub. Some people use salt, which is a great effect. And when I've got the patience, I will try use it myself. But I like to work on the fly and keep the momentum going, so I don't tend to use anything that slows the process down. I'm not, for the same reason, I'm not a huge fan of masking fluid, and I'm not a huge fan of salt grains, because of, like I say, you have to stop. The process all of a sudden has to come to a grinding halt while these things do their bit, and it can take some time. As I said, I like to keep the momentum going. So these next areas, albeit they're not necessarily done in the biggest area, I suppose, would be the bottom, that triangle of white paper that you can still see emanating from the bottom right corner. So really, I should be doing that next, because that's the next biggest area. But instead, I wanted to establish this field at the back, and I'll put that photo back up on the screen in a moment. And so what I'm thinking of here is how do I convey what it is I'm looking at? One way of doing this is obviously by getting the right colours first and the temperature of those colours. This is a green with some raw sienna. The green is a phthalo green with some raw sienna mixed into it to give it that warmth. So there's two thin triangles that you've just seen me paint. The furthest one had more water in it. The one that's underneath the sky had more water in it, whereas the most recent one there in the bottom right, a lot more paint, less water, and a bit warmed up a lot more with the raw sienna. And you can see me using a bit of tissue there from time to time. That allows me to adjust the tonal value of those areas also by lifting some paint out. You've only really got two things. Well, maybe okay. We've got three things really to use when we're dealing with paint, and that is tonal value, and that's color temperature, the second thing, and the third thing is color intensity. So at the top there, tone is king. Tone is the most important. Tonal value is the most important. It must vary throughout your painting, and you need to strike the balance, especially when you're needing to nail a focal point territory, which I go into in my other tutorials. Then you've got, as I say, you've got color temperature to create a sense of depth, of recession, the cools, the blues pushing things back in the distance, and those warmer, lovely warm olivey greens that you can see, and on the left there, the burnt sienna, orangey brown warms, they pull things right up close, or can bring them right up close. And then there's color intensity. It's how bright you want those colors to be. And a lot of this, particularly the latter element, the color intensity, can be very much a personal preference thing. From full intensity colors of paint straight out of the tube with very little modification. That's quite a nice effect. I don't use it a lot myself, but there's a good effect. What I'm doing here now, I've gone in deliberately incredibly dark. And the mix has been mostly phthalo green with a bit of ultramarine blue and a bit of burnt sienna. Now it can't stay that dark, but as I mentioned a moment ago, I do actually like to go darker first so that I can lift out afterwards. So I'm just leaving that paint there sit on the surface for a bit, and now I'm starting to put in a bit of colour to avoid the flatness. So I've not yet lifted any tonal value back out. I'm just getting rich colours into this area. It's actually a row of woodland. There's the lifting out now. So what I've done that you haven't seen is off screen here, I've cleaned that flat brush that I'm using, the 1-inch flat brush, cleaned it thoroughly, and left only a very, very small amount of water in it. That means that every time I make contact with that wet paint area that I'm working in, I'm actually taking paint back off the surface because the brush is thirsty. And there's a lot to be learned and practiced in that particular skill. If you just, it's knowing how thirsty the brush is, when it's just a case of lifting the paint off, to other occasion where you might decide you want to put something back, so you pick up paint again. But it's very much a push-pull type of exercise. I'm just using a credit card there to create a little bit of texture. Texture you've got to be very careful with, particularly at this distance. This row of woodland that I'm working on, which incidentally is going to be the focal point territory, is a good, I wouldn't like to guess, it could be as much as 5 miles away from where I was standing when I took the photo. So texture is not going to be busy, it's not going to be hard-edged, it's going to be a sort of soft, subtle, what I call open texture, as opposed to a tight, closed texture, which you'll see in the immediate foreground. So texture is a lot like color intensity. It dissipates at distance, it reduces, becomes softer. So unlike the area I'm working in now, where I'm suggesting at the edge of this woodland in the foreground, you can actually see individual branches, and just a sense of across this horizontal field here in the bottom right, that just a hint of what's happening on the lay of the land there. It's a rigger brush just making more or less horizontal lines. Doing a bit more spattering here. It's a number 7 size round brush, and I just hold it between my thumb and my forefinger. I'm right-handed, and I tap that brush with my index finger, and doing the same here, only I will tap again. There you can see me tapping again. Only this is the rigger brush with white gouache, which I take straight from the tube. So, and realizing now that with all good landscapes, most of our landscapes are going to be in the orientation of your paper. The watercolor paper that you're working on, you've chosen to take the landscape format. Now then, a landscape format screams out for something that's doing the opposite, something that's going in the other direction, if you like. So what I'm doing here is I'm finding a spot on a vertical by where I'm offering this skinny tree, this very linear tree. It is a very powerful single vertical thrust on this side, and that's what that's what the painting requires when you've done all that horizontal stuff that makes up the landscape, the movement, the entire movement. Now I'm debating this left-hand corner. Doing a sort of critique, if you like, on the spot of my own work here. And I decided that as nice as that colour is, it was competing with my focal point territory, which is sort of around that vertical tree that we just did. So what I've done here, I've made a very weak mix of the blue and the burnt sienna, and I'm knocking back that corner. So it suddenly, by doing that on that part of the painting, that side of the painting, it brings attention back to where it should be, and that's that right-hand side where that vertical tree is. So there we are, folks. As I say, I've mentioned the most salient points here. I can see the design at the end of the painting, which is good, obviously. But this is why I've chosen to work, because I just used to paint sort of randomly, I suppose, and end up with no cohesion in my painting as a result of not planning out the design and the composition. So if you have enjoyed this, please remember to subscribe if you haven't already. Please also remember to hit the like button, and if you want immediate notifications of when I upload these new clips and short videos, etc., then just click on that bell icon. In the meantime, I hope you've enjoyed this one, and I hope to see you at the next one. Happy painting!